Paul Smith and Steve Howard, two men with a dream to create ZX Spectrum games with horror characters that would shake the very foundation of man's hubris. Now, I don't know what Paul Smith and Steve Howard look like, nor do I know if this was in fact their dream, but for the purposes of this video we're going to assume that these facts are 100% true, because it's the only way to explain why they entered the realm of mortal man, created 3 horrifying games, and then vanished back into the nether realms, their mortal sins committed to tape and humanity left to suffer.
David, please, the police are satisfied. I'm certain if there were a monster roaming around northern England, we'd have seen it on the telly.
Now, Smith and Howard were most famous for their magnum opus Werewolves of London, a game I've exceedingly fond memories of, and one that, unfortunately, stands the test of time like a bottle of milk left on a doorstep on Mercury. A game that most definitely was not probably inspired by the incredible American Werewolf in London. But we'll come back to that, because in order to truly understand the majesty of Smith and Howard, we have to travel all the way back to 1986 for their first game. A title which would instill fear in the heart of every teenage boy who managed to get his hands on the cassette tape, bringing to life the greatest monster mankind has ever known. Mermaids. More specifically, one mermaid, an overweight mermaid with massive jiggly waps. Say all you want about Dead or Alive's jiggle physics, but the ZX Spectrum was clearly the first to give us this important piece of technology. Unfortunately, it's the only piece of important technology it gives us, because this is quite possibly one of the worst games I've come across in my 5 entire years of venturing deep into the underbelly of garbage. So please, hear me loud and clear when I say this game was released for £10 English and it barely fucking works. Your controls are simple enough, left, right and down. In order to move up, you just have to stay still, which would be fine and dandy if it wasn't for the fact there are enemies absolutely everywhere, and normally moving in a horizontal pattern in awkward tight spots, just to ensure you will, absolutely, most definitely end up dying. When you consider that every piece of scenery is covered in a thin layer of glue, you're not going to be having a fun time. The story goes that you, playing as Myrtle, a toothless 112-year-old mermaid, have fallen in love with Gormless Gordon, who has run away from your monstrous form underwater. Then he forgot he can't breathe underwater and fell asleep, so you have to rescue him. To do this, you need to pick up air bottles to keep Gordon alive, and bottles of stout, which keep Myrtle alive, and that's about all you get instructions-wise, and in all fairness, you won't really need any more than that because you're going to get absolutely nowhere. Here's my first attempt. Killed by a fish before I even got my hands on the keyboard. What's the point of living in the sea if you can't handle the bottom end of the food chain? Death is a constant in this game, whether it's due to enemies spawning on top of you as soon as you enter a screen, or because you drop dynamite because God forbid you actually try and solve a puzzle, or perhaps you simply get stuck in the scenery forever. This is just you now. This is your life, inhumanely glued to a rock until you drown. Crash Magazine gave the game 66% for some reason, but did state, the instructions for Mermaid Madness are fab. Very witty and jolly, and informative too. The game isn't quite as good. Well, thanks Crash. Well worth a tenner. They conclude the review with, the gameplay is slow and boring and your energy goes very quickly, so high scores are quite hard to get. The graphics are poor and there are many attribute problems which really start to get on your nerves. The characters are large, undetailed and garish in colour, and the backgrounds are uninteresting. The sound is also below average. I can't really recommend this one. On the whole, poorly finished. 66%, proving once and for all that Crash Magazine reviewers were in charge of the reviews on Games Master and Bad Influence. Anyway, let's be fair to the Smith and Howard Warlocks, because while this summoned monster appeared to be nothing more than a battered cod with a couple of bangers and no chips, their next monster was very much in line with what you would expect. It was Frankenstein's monster's wife. Bride of Frankenstein lays the foundation of what would become Werewolves of London, by which I mean it's basically exactly the same, but worse. It also manages to fold in a little bit of Mermaid Madness too, because for some reason our lead character is a rotund woman, though decidedly less buoyant in the boobies, which I'm sure you're all aware brings down the score by at least 2 points. This is a game you're going to be more than familiar with if you've ever played a ZX Spectrum game that falls firmly into the maze category. That means you're going to be wandering around without a clue what to do, constantly being battered by enemies and getting lost. Here we have to deal with a constant flurry of ghosts and skeletons that spawn out of nowhere and then just home in on you persistently, meaning the ability to stand still is something you're going to be completely without. The overall goal here is to find all of Frankenstein's body parts, put them together, and make him come back to life so you can, I don't know, bang your undead rude bits together, whatever. Curiously, the insert once again shows our heroine chasing a man who clearly doesn't want anything to do with her, and I'm beginning to wonder if Smith and Howard have some sort of fetish involving Amazonian monster women chasing after them. I'm not here to kink shame, lads, but you need to calm the fuck down. The controls here are a vast improvement over Mermaid Madness, but there's still plenty of issues to go along with it. Firstly, those enemies, good luck dealing with those. They're a massive pain in the arse. But secondly, navigating this castle is beyond a headache, and for varied reasons. First of all, the doors don't make any sense. Here's a map submitted to Sinclair user, it even comes with a disclaimer. Certain rooms on this map may seem to be drawn back to front. This is due to the odd nature of gameplay. They've managed to turn a simple maze game into an MC Escher maze game, because half of the places you end up make absolutely zero sense when moving from one door to another. Whether you're using a map or not, you're going to get lost, and you won't even have time to look at the bloody map anyway, because oh my god, just stop! Thankfully, I found a copy of the game that removes all the monsters, which makes a boring and frustrating game into a boring but slightly less frustrating game, and ultimately meant I could just discover how much worse exploration could be. Let's talk about locked doors. Inside the castle are multiple locked doors, and also inside the castle are multiple keys to unlock those doors. All the doors look the same, but the keys all look slightly different, just to give you some visual indication of what's going on. Now, for reasons I can't even begin to fathom, you're only allowed to carry one key at a time. You can carry a shovel and a pickaxe and an oil lamp all at once, but apparently it's impossible to use a keychain. Your job here, then, is to pick up a key, wander around looking for a locked door, testing out the key, realising it doesn't work, and then going off to find another key. Hopefully not one you've already picked up, because there are no less than 7 different keys. Sometimes you'll open a locked door only to discover that there's another locked door on the other side that, lo and behold, uses one of the 6 other keys to access it. And just bear in mind, the entire time, if I hadn't found this glorious monsterless version of the game, I'd be constantly chased down by enemies while attempting to do all of this. At one point I end up in a completely black screen, something Werewolves of London fans will no doubt recognise, but unbeknownst to me, I needed to have a lamp in order to see in this area, so fuck me for not knowing that. But it took me a solid minute to scramble my way back out, because the other thing the game likes to do, just to be super annoying, is have you walk in one direction through a door but pop out in the opposite direction on the other side. This often leads you to accidentally go through the same door multiple times unless you stand still the second you walk through. Let me sidestep here to clarify that while I have bitched my way to the castle gates and back, Bride of Frankenstein is still a huge improvement on their previous game, which makes the 59% it got in Crash Magazine all the more confusing. The vast majority of their complaints echo the same I have here, so at the very least it's not even something that was acceptable at the time, but the overall tone of the review is more positive than its predecessor, and yet it still got caned. Crash's scoring system is certainly a puzzle, that's for sure. And speaking of puzzles, Bride of Frankenstein has its own set of, well, they're not really puzzles, they're just, well, let's call them chores. You use a pickaxe to get into crypts, and you use a spade to dig up graves, and you find the pieces you need to put Frankenstein together. Then you also need to find a plug so you can start the machine to bring him to life, but I've got to be honest, I realised that was never going to happen when I was so bored I started trying to pickaxe a corpse just to get some sort of enjoyment out of life. Let's just have a look at the ending on RZX Archive. Well, that would be worth anyone's time, I'm sure you'll agree. Might as well check Mermaid Madness while we're here. Just wonderful. Certainly sensing a theme here, and Werewolves of London likely isn't going to buck the trend, because finally, it's time to take a look at the game that is often fondly remembered, not least by me because I was absolutely obsessed with the game. It's story time. My uncle was a huge fan of horror and had a pretty solid collection of horror comics, books and VHS tapes. Just looking at the cover art scared the flipping bejesus out of me because I was a preteen wimp. But one day, my cousin decided he'd show me some of the amazing special effects from American Werewolf in London. And while I did find it mildly terrifying at the time, I was also deeply fascinated. My only knowledge of the film was a collection of werewolf attack scenes, the dream sequences, and the incredible werewolf transformation itself, put together in my head by a vague idea of the plot from the blurb on the back of the box. And so when I finally got my hands on the game Werewolves of London, I automatically assumed that this was definitely the game of the film and ignored the fact the title was slightly different. As with every Spectrum game that ever existed, I had no idea what to do, but I was enamoured with what must surely be a photorealistic version of the entirety of London, replete with streets and parks and police stations and subway stations. The main character cursed not only by a werewolf, but also the strangest walking animation that has ever existed, making him look like he's playing spoons on his knees whenever he should wander from left to right. And it also looks like he's trying to button up his trousers whenever he walks up and down. Then, by some cruel twist of fate, he's also been cursed by some sort of cloning spell, because all of the men look exactly like him, except the unexplainably French-looking police officers who enjoy moonwalking. Yes, I'm already nitpicking. At the time, this was incredible, because as with everyone my age, we often just enjoyed the wonder of walking around a giant map. And if that giant map could also look like a real-world space, there was something mystifying about the entire thing. It felt like a real place, where other Spectrum games often felt like, well, an abstract mess. Because they generally were. That was then, though. And this is now. And now is not so kind to then. The biggest problem with Werewolves of London is the thing that you probably first loved about it in the first place. The entire game is endless, confused wandering. The object of the game here is to remove the werewolf's curse by slaughtering the family members of those who cursed you, bizarrely known as yuppies in the instruction manual, which I'm not sure yuppies were well known for placing werewolf curses on people, but okay. As you get closer to a family member, a cross flashes, and then if you're a werewolf, you can try and attack them, and if you're a human, you can do absolutely nothing. The only advantage to your human form is the police will leave you alone, but as you can't actually do anything worthwhile during the daytime phase, you can basically consider it another curse to add to the pile. You're a useless human who can do nothing but a slight jump. Sometimes games can be too real. When in werewolf form then, you have the ability to awkwardly try and kill people before they run away, but most confusingly, if the police catch you, they put you in jail? I'm not one to doubt the Met Police. I'm sure they do sterling work with zero controversy, but I'm not entirely sure the first solution that comes to mind upon seeing a humanoid wolf is to lock him up like a drunk and let him sleep it off, and then just set him free in the morning. You've literally killed people. This is madness! As is the route to the police station itself, in fact. You exit into a courtyard, climb up onto a roof, go onto the other side of the roof, and then go down another set of stairs in order to reach the street. Smith and Howard may not have known how to make an effective monster game, but they sure as hell knew how to build a horrifying game world. Overall, there's just not a great deal to do in Werewolves of London, but that nostalgia kick of the past kept trying to overwrite my current negative view, so once again, I checked the reviews at the time because surely this was the one. This was the game that everyone loved and fondly remembers, and it's got one review. Yours, Sinclair. 3 out of 10. Essentially, it doesn't work at all. What was envisaged as an atmospheric arcade adventure unofficially based on an American werewolf in London is just an aimless chase about with drab graphics and terminally tedious gameplay. Ouch! Right in the nostalgia gland. And so, it stands that Werewolves of London, while being the most popular of Smith and Howard's monster outings, was actually the least well received by critics at the time, and I can't really disagree with anything they say, certainly not in terms of gameplay, but you wouldn't have caught a 10-year-old me saying that without getting a serious Chinese burn as a consequence. It's a shame, really, that Werewolves of London is most definitely their best and most ambitious game, with Mermaid Madness being the clear worst, and yet the review scores at the time were completely the wrong way around. Between 1986 when Mermaids released and 1989 when Werewolves released, the game landscape had moved on at such a rapid pace that critics perhaps couldn't see the joy of simply mooching about as a big walking dog on the streets of old London town. It's a shame, it really is. Oh well, let's check the ending for this one then. Yeah, the game just crashes. There is a bug fix to poke in if you really want to get an actual ending, but I think there's something poetic about this game finally being laid to rest alongside its monstrous counterparts. Howard and Smith, then. Not exactly two names that are going to be placed on the pantheon, but god damn it, at least they tried a bit. They tried a bit, and at the very least, they left good memories in the past. Good memories that shall, from this point on, remain buried, because it turns out that digging up this corpse and attempting to reanimate it will curse the boredom right into you. So, stay dead, Werewolves of London. Stay dead. Good boy.